Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on the Doing Good Index 2024 India edition. I just want to note that although the four of us who will be presenting today are all sitting in Mumbai, we're not together. But since we have hundreds of people, close to 700 signed up for this seminar, I'm wondering now if we can all put a Bollywood star on our resume. I would like to. But anyway, I am Ruth Shapiro, and I am the co-founder and CEO of the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, or CAPS. Together with our esteemed colleagues, we will present to you today the findings of the Doing Good Index 2024 and some commentary from them. So let me introduce our colleagues to you first. We have Pushpa Singh, who is the founder of GuideStar India. Pushpa has spent her entire career trying to build trust and accountability for the social sector in India. And GuideStar India is one of our partners for the Doing Good Index. And I think that many of those who are on this call are on the GuideStar platform and know what an important platform and player it is in building the credibility of our often overlooked sector. So thank you, Pushpa, for all your hard work and also for your partnership in the Doing Good Index, which has been now going on for almost 10 years. Nashir Dajwala is our other partner on building the Doing Good Index from India. Nashir is the founder and program director of HAP, which we did not steal the name. He gave us permission, but it's the Center for the Advancement of Philanthropy. And I think many of you on this call will know that Nashir is really the preeminent expert on the legal and regulatory ecosystem in India around the social sector. So whenever somebody has a regulatory and a legal question, they go to him first and last. And if you have not signed up to his blog or his newsletter, which is available through WhatsApp, I really encourage you to do so. And last but not least is Gayatri Lobo, who is the CEO of the ATE Chandra Foundation. ATE Chandra Foundation is a leading philanthropic organization in India, and as its CEO, Gayatri is a very prestigious thought leader in our space and has been involved in innovations to help make the sector more market-driven and transparent. And so I really want to thank all three of our speakers who will share their views after I do the presentation. So let me share my screen and we'll get into the Doing Good Index 2024. You can see it, right? I hope you can see it. As we can take Q&A throughout, so please write your questions in the chat or the question box, and we will answer them after the presentation. Let me just explain a little bit about why we're here today. We want to increase the credibility and transparency of the sector. And the Doing Good Index, which is in its fourth iteration, comes out every 2 years, is our effort to look across the region and to do that. CAPS, the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, we are based in Hong Kong, but we work throughout the region. We also have a sister organization in India called the Center for Asian Philanthropy India, which works on India-related issues and helps us, is a knowledge partner similar to GuideStar and CAP, the other CAP, the singular CAP. So we work on, our mission is to increase both the quality and quantity of all ways in which private resources are brought to bear on doing good, working on increasing the quantity and quality of philanthropy, on CSR, impact investing, and the Doing Good Index is our flagship policy piece, which, as I said, comes out every 2 years. So, okay. A lot of people focus on how wealthy Asia is becoming, and it is becoming wealthy. But we still have a lot of work to do. And everyone on this call is well aware of that because you're on the front lines of doing good. The region is, as a whole, is 32 years behind schedule in achieving the SDGs, which means that as a whole, the region is on track to reach 0 of the SDGs by 2030, which was the original goal. So we do have a lot of work to do, and nonprofit, social enterprise, philanthropists all play an important role in helping us to get to accomplishing those goals, those sustainable development goals. Let me just say that for the purposes of CAPS, we use the term social delivery organization when we talk about the organizations that receive support. Those, we call them social delivery organizations. They're social enterprises and nonprofit organizations. And we do that because some nonprofits are now have a for-profit sustainable income stream. Social enterprises are not necessarily nonprofits. And we don't use the word NGO because in many Asian economies, the NGOs are in fact linked to the government NGOs. And so we use this term social delivery organization to be an umbrella term to be inclusive of all of the types of organizations. These organizations, the SDOs, and the ones that support them mean that Asia has great potential. As a region, we are getting wealthier, and we have a number of social innovations that really can move the conversation, move the progress further. And let's go through some of those with the Doing Good Index. The index, now in 4th iteration, started in 2018. It includes 17 economies, and that is 15 countries plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. Plus, we have a section on Myanmar. For obvious reasons, we haven't been able to collect data in Myanmar, but we want to include what's happening there, tragic as it is, in this year's index, which you can see. We surveyed 2,183 SDOs. Now that's a big number, and it's really impressive when you realize that this survey takes 45 minutes to an hour to fill out. It has over 100 questions. So to get this kind of data and to get this many organizations to fill it out is quite an accomplishment. And in India, we could not do this without the help of GuideStar India and Pushpa and the Center for the Advancement of Philanthropy, Nashir Dajrawala. We also hold expert meetings, and we ask our partners to convene a group of experts to go through and look at some of these questions. They include always a lawyer who's an expert in the legal issues. They include an accountant who knows what the tax implications are. They include government officials. They include academics. And so that we have other voices in addition to the SDOs that are part of this index. Now, how did India do? We have 4 clusters. Let me say that you can see that in each of these clusters, these are in alphabetical order. So these are not league tables. The clusters are in alphabetical order, so we know that India is in the doing okay category. It's not in the category of Bangladesh, but it could improve. Doing better and doing well. Actually, if you look at the statistics, if somebody really, if an economy really hit it out of the park, there is room to be doing excellently, but no one hits that yet. People often ask, why does Chinese Taipei and Singapore, why are they always at the top? Why do they do this? And I often say that it's because in those two places, the government sees the social sector as a really important partner in achieving the goals for the entire economy or nation. They enable the sector such that it can be a partner to government and to the private sector in getting the job done. In the other countries, it's not as clear that the government is fully on board. And what we're going to do is find out in India what the messaging is and what the rules and regulations are for India. India has been in this category from the beginning. So we did the first Doing Good Index in 2018, then we did one in 2020, and again in 2022. India, you can see, has stayed in this category. And we're going to go through now and talk about why that might be the case. Let me also say that because we do this every 2 years, we include a separate section, which is not included in the actual index, but because we're getting over 2,000 responses from STOs around the region, we think it's a good opportunity to ask other questions. In 2022, not surprisingly, we asked about the impact of COVID. In 2024, we really wanted to know about technology. And so we asked these questions, and we're going to give you the findings, but those findings are not included in the index. The index itself is comprised of indicators in 4 tranches: regulations, tax and fiscal policies, procurement, and ecosystem. Of those 4, 3 of them have to do with government policies: regulations, tax and fiscal policies, and procurement. Ecosystem really speaks to how the society embraces the notion of participating in the social sector, whether you're a donor or a recipient or a volunteer. So let me get to the answers around technology. 89% of the organizations that responded to this said that they have sufficient access to the internet. Now, we know that in India, everyone has their phones, they're connected. Increasingly, those phones are smartphones. So they have access, 89%, which is higher than the Asia average. But more than that, 55% offer their services online. You must know that that number greatly increased during COVID. And once organizations got used to offering products and services online, they kept doing it even when the pandemic ended. 72% incorporate technology in their day-to-day. 69% use an online platform to collaborate, on online platforms such as GuideStar and other ones. And 78% use social media to promote or disseminate their work. 95% use basic software, but only 22% use advanced software. There's real opportunity to help organizations become more digital savvy and to incorporate technology in much more useful ways. The challenge here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit in the next slide, is that many donors don't support capacity building across the board in any way, and they also don't support capacity building around digital capacity. And that's something that I know that ATE Chandra Foundation has been working on, and maybe Gayatri can talk about that in her remarks. 77% of SDOs do not have or unaware of a cybersecurity plan. This is a problem. I think I'm not speaking so much out of school to tell you that CAPS ourselves, we have been we have suffered from cyber attacks. So any organization is vulnerable and needs a cybersecurity plan. I think probably I can think that everyone in this webinar is trying to make the world a better place, but unfortunately, there are people out there who are not in our camp and just want to exploit and use people, and they will use technology to do that. So if you're running an organization and you don't have a cybersecurity plan, I encourage you to try to put one into place. 66% say that most donors are generally unwilling to give unrestricted funding. During COVID, many organizations, many SDOs had to pivot to offer their services and products online. And yet they didn't have the skills to really be able to do that. So they had to somehow scrape the money together in order to educate themselves, to buy the software, and in some cases, the hardware that was necessary. And for that, operational funding or unrestricted funding is very useful. For all of you, and if you're especially true if you're a grant-making organization on this call, I encourage you to have really a serious talk with your grantees, and if you're a grantee with your donors, about how to up your digital game and put in place not only a cybersecurity, but to take advantage of more sophisticated software to be able to do your job more efficiently and more impactfully. So that's the tech piece, and we can answer more questions if you have them during the Q&A. What can India do better? Certainly, we need to mitigate the trust deficit through consistent regulations and policies. And Nashir will really address this in his comments. And we can use these online platforms and other mechanisms to increase collaboration among nonprofits, but also among SCOs and also among donors and government, so that we can be all working from the same page on the same page. We have some mixed signals from government. So on the one hand, the government has done incredible things. For example, India is really the only country that mandates CSR in the way that it does. And we all know that because of the CSR legislation, there's a lot more money coming into the sector from corporations. India is also now has a social stock exchange, which I think my colleagues are going to talk about in greater extent. These are terrific social innovations that really shine a light on how private social investment should be credible, should be trustworthy, and is doing a good job. On the other hand, India has also really toughened FCRA measures and tax rulings. So the daily operations, the life of your typical nonprofit in India has become much more difficult as a result of many of these regulations. And I know that Nashir will talk about it to a greater extent. What are the other mixed bags of regulations? Well, when it comes to register an organization, a nonprofit, or a social enterprise acting as a nonprofit, in India, there are 2 clearances necessary, which is lower than the Asia average. And it takes about 125 days. When we worked with incorporating CAPI, the Center for Asian Philanthropy India, it took a long time to be able to get approval, even with the kind of more automated system that we have now in India. 67% of people responding to the survey says that the laws are difficult to understand. Now, Nashir says that they're not difficult to understand, but he just must be a genius, because I've spent time on the government of India websites, and they're not the most easy to navigate. Whether it's registering or understanding the tax and the tax liabilities and rules about registration of nonprofits, or in my case, just even getting a visa to come here. The rules are difficult to understand, and if you don't understand the rules, you can't comply with them very readily. So it's important to have clear and consistent policies that are well communicated. India is one of two economies in the region where the submission of an annual report is optional. Many nonprofits, SDOs, come to CAPS and say, hey, how can we get more? We need money, we need funding, how can we get more? And my answer is often, it is incumbent on you to tell your story. It is incumbent on you also to have a decent website, to tell a would-be donor where the money's going and what are you doing. Whether or not the government requires a submission of an annual report, you should make your statistics, your impact, your value add clear to the public at large. That will help you with your fundraising. And I might add that although India is only two that doesn't require the submission of an annual report, in almost all the other cases, while the government requires a submission of an annual report, they don't publish those annual reports or make them public. So only the government has that information, not the public at large. The other area in which you can see a clear distinction is tax incentives. Now, people often ask, what difference do tax incentives mean when people don't pay their taxes anyway? And if you ask a philanthropist, are you giving because of tax incentives? I can tell you that 100% of the time, the answer will be no, of course not. I'm giving from my heart. Tax incentives have nothing to do with it. Whether or not that's true, tax incentives are a powerful message from government. The government is saying, we believe that we're putting our money where our mouth is. We believe that the social sector is worthy of this investment, and we too are making that investment. You can see that in India, for the majority of organizations, not all, I know there are some exceptions, the donor will get a 50% tax subsidy. That is lower, as you can see, from most other Asian economies. The country that has the highest subsidy is Singapore, with 250% for both individuals and for corporations, with no limit. India has a limit, so even the 50% is only 10% of an individual's finances, and 10% of a corporation's revenue is eligible to receive this benefit. 84% of the organizations that filled out the survey believe that tax incentives are important. Again, one, because they provide real money back to the donor. I don't want to underestimate that, but also because of the messaging that the government is sending. On the other hand, as we know, India is one of two economies in the region with mandated levels of CSR, and the other one is Nepal, which is generally not enforced. In India, of course, it is enforced. Our survey shows that there is a much greater need for collaboration, and we wrote at the beginning, this is one of the ways that India can progress. 91% of organizations collaborate with each other. That is the most prevalent kind of collaborations. We hear a lot about collaboration. It's the most, I feel like it's the most prevalent word in our sector now. But collaboration is not always easy. And you can see that while 91% say they do collaborate with others, only 57% say those collaborations have increased. 73% collaborate with their donors, 64% with local government, which is lower than in many other places, and only 57% with corporations, despite the CSR regulations. So there's a lot of opportunity to find synergies and partnerships. But in order to do that, you have to really understand what the needs are of the organization or the entity or the agency that you want to partner with, listen and figure out what those win-win strategies are. We can talk more about that again in the Q&A. Government engagement. So we think it's important that government asks for input from the social sector. In this case, we can see that 58% said they sometimes are in communication with government. 28%, close to a third, say they're never in conversation with government, and 14% say they're often. How can government really adequately come up with regulations and enable the sector and create more accountability and trust if they're not talking to the organizations that are on the ground trying to do the work in this regard? So we think policy consultations are really important. The organizations say the government can best support them by providing direct funding. That does happen throughout the region, making it easier to receive foreign funding. That's a political minefields that I don't want to go to too much, but we might come up during our Q&A. And providing increased tax donations, again, signaling that the government wants these kinds of donations to be made. PM Cares gets a higher tax subsidy than many other organizations, and so the government is clearly expressing a desire for organizations to support efforts like PM Cares, and I believe Nashir can tell me if I'm wrong that many of the CM Cares also enjoy a higher tax subsidy. So it is possible, and this, you can see how the signaling behind that really matters. What about funding? 44% of organizations in India do receive government grants. That's great. It's on par. It could be higher, but it's on par with the rest of Asia. And you can see that, but it's small money. So although 44% of organizations do receive government grants, those government grants only account for about 10% of the overall annual budget of these organizations, which is, looks like it's big time lower than the Asia average, but it's actually only 2 percentage points lower than the Asia average. 89% of organizations find the application process to get those government grants very difficult. Another way that the government can interact with nonprofits is through procurement. Now, we at CAPS are a fan of procurement, government procurement of the services and products from nonprofits and social enterprises. Why? One, because if the government procures services and products, it's like a good housekeeping seal of approval. It adds to the legitimacy of these organizations in providing goods and services. Two, it provides a sustainable income stream to these organizations, although government in India is somewhat notorious for not paying in a timely manner. But the money eventually comes, and that can be helpful. Only 2% of organizations in India get government procurement contracts, and 81% say the application process is very difficult. There's a lot that can be done in this regard, and in some other countries, actually the government has a tender process that privileges SDOs so that they would be the kind of first default choice in providing some of these services. What about companies? 67% of companies, according to our respondents, host volunteers. That's really important. That enables trust. It creates more connectivity. It helps the volunteers. It helps the community. It helps the nonprofits. These are win-wins. 23% receive corporate funding. CSR has helped with that, but we can still do more. And we know that it's the top 18,000 companies that are mandated to provide that CSR support, which leaves many other companies just below that revenue threshold that could be doing some work in this regard. The organizations say that corporations can help them, one, not surprisingly, by funding them, but also by providing products such as software, such as chairs, tables, all the things that organizations need help too. For those organizations that are working in healthcare, drug donations can be really useful. So there's many ways that corporations can help SDOs. And lastly, but not leastly, they can offer technical support. At the end of the day, a nonprofit or a social enterprise is trying to run an effective business. They have a staff, they have to pay bills, they need to find the salaries, they need to provide, they need to do government reporting, and they don't necessarily have the accounting or the financial forecasting or the marketing or the HR experience that are sitting inside every company. So it's really helpful when companies allow their employees not only to do a volunteer cleanup or do a little bit of volunteering, but to actually help these organizations with technical skills that they would find very useful. Lastly, I just want to talk about talent. 70% of organizations find recruiting staff a challenge. 75% find retaining them once recruited even more of a challenge. And you can see that 19% do receive support for capacity building, but that means 81% do not. And why do we put support for capacity building here? Because look, we know that when you choose to work for a nonprofit and by and large for a social enterprise, you're choosing not to get private sector wages. And you're making that choice because you want to give back to the community. You want to be of help. That's terrific. But that doesn't mean that you don't have professional aspirations, that you don't want to grow and learn. And so organizations that can build the capacity of their team offer a really important benefit that the employees want and can be in lieu of a private sector salary. So we think it's really important that organizations build the capacity of their employees, and we hope that donors will support that. And again, I know that Gayatri can speak to this because you do a lot around capacity building. So having said all that, I'm going to show you right now our microsite in about CAPS. You can click on this through our website, caps.org, and you'll see that this microsite is a phenomenal resource that allows you not only to compare India 2024 to India 2022 or 2020, but you can compare India to China, for example, or India to Pakistan, and see where you sit compared to the others. It allows you to play with the data. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, that was very cool. I hope you agree, and I hope that you'll use the microsite because you can, and because we put a lot of work and effort into it. So please go ahead and click onto our website and click through the microsite so you can see it yourself. So I really want to thank you. I see that the questions have come in, and now before the Q&A, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nashir Dajawala, who will share his comments with us. So I'll stop sharing the screen. Oh, first I'm going to say, okay, you can see them. And here we go, Nashir.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for that very enlightening opening that you have made. For me, it has been a wonderful journey with you, Ruth, and with CAPS for now close to a decade. I remember when we did the first Doing Good Index. I'm satisfied that since the beginning of the journey, India features as doing okay. But like Martin Luther King, I certainly have a dream that we may move to doing better and maybe someday even in doing well. That's a dream. But is this a dream? For any dream to get fulfilled, I think it's very important that we as a sector also speak about our feelings to the regulators. There is no denying the fact that why are certain economies in Asia doing well or doing better? It's because they have very clearly enabling legislations. I submit, and this is a fact, this is not a criticism, this is a fact that any professional will hold up, that the laws are fairly disenabling in region. I would even go to the extent of saying for certain NPOs, it is even crippling. It cripples NGOs from functioning at their optimum capacity. And to a large extent, it's not very enabling even for the donors. Things are very complex in terms of giving what they can give. Can they give to the corpus? Can they not give to the corpus? Can they give for how much can they give for administration? There's a whole bunch. This is not a technical workshop. If I were to talk purely on the challenges, I would need probably an hour or two to do that. And I have to sum everything up in like less than 5 minutes. That's the given time to me. Many in the corporate sector with whom I often have heated arguments say that, oh, it must be pretty easy for you guys in the non-profit sector. And I tell them that if you think that the corporate sector is regulated, you guys at least have the slogan of the government saying ease of doing business. Point is, we talk of the Doing Good Index. I do not say any good ease of doing good. I mean, there's no ease of doing good. There are layers and layers of legislation that non-profit organizations or SDOs or SPOs or by whatever nomenclature you want to call the sector go through. At the state level, there are complex regulators in Maharashtra state, for those who may be here who are registered as trust or society will vouch for the fact that the charity commissioner's department, it's extremely challenging to meet with the requirements of that office is supposed to be a regulatory office but functions like a district court. And this is again a fact. This is not a criticism. I mean, where is the ease of doing good? By comparison, of course, ROC, the registrar of companies, is a little bit more seamless. But then we also have states where there is no equivalent of a charity commissioner, and you can actually legally bypass one legal regulatory authority that is outside of states of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh. So you see this kind of a dichotomy that exists. The pain of NPOs registered as trust and societies in Maharashtra, Gujarat, etc., is very different from people who are registered as trust in other states saying, oh, but we have no such regulator. We only report into the income tax. How lucky. So I feel there is an excess of regulation. So one is the state level regulation. Then of course there is the income tax, which applies uniformly throughout the country. Whether you're a trust society, Section 8 company, income tax is the same for you. If you're getting foreign contributions, there is a third entity that emerges, and which is the Ministry of Home Affairs. If you are into any supply of services or supply of goods, the GST entity comes into play. A whole bunch of HR laws apply to you. So if people live under the myth that, it's the corporate world which is extremely well governed, and, you have every norm that you have to, welcome to the real world. Welcome to the world of non-profit organizations in India. It is enormous. It is virtually backbreaking for, and that's only with regard to. Now, why are studies like what CAPS does, as in Roots Organization, Center for Asian Philanthropy, important? Because I do personally see a lot of value in proper research and data. Proper research and data helps governments look at policy and probably have policies that can enrich the sector. After all, I don't think anyone who is even the largest grant making foundation cannot say we are in competition with the government of India. You can never even dream to compete in terms of resources. I mean, the largest foundation in India would be comparatively small compared to the resources the government. So we are not in competition with the government of India. And statistics is important. We have the government of India still talking about 3.3 million NGOs in this country. It's not so. Income tax data says that we have less than 300,000 NGOs in this country, at least the tax exempt organization. Now, where is 3.3 million and where is 300, less than 300,000? Data, research, very, very important. Now, very quickly coming to some challenges, and I'll take just a couple of minutes on that, particularly income tax. Now, I don't know whether this is good news or bad news, but by sometime around next year, we'll be seeing a brand new Income Tax Act. This has come in all the mainstream media. The Central Board of Direct Taxes says that it will review the current Income Tax Act within the next 6 months. And so I'm thinking that by the next financial year, we may see a brand new Income Tax Act. Are we prepared for it? Are we prepared for changes? Are the changes going to become better? Are they going to become more enabling? Now is the time for us as a sector to, based on data, based on some of the hardships that we have, speak to the regulators in the nicest way. I mean, end of the day, it is the job to regulate us. The trouble only arises when the regulator moves from a regulatory role to a control role. That is not a desirable thing. But right now, income tax requires your 12A ATG tax exemption deduction to be renewed every 5 years. Is it necessary? I mean, it was necessary in 2021 because you wanted to weed out organizations that were non-functional. But do you need to do this every 5 years? Maybe make it 10 years. Do you realize the enormous delays that can happen when 15,000 organizations whose FCRA had lapsed required renewal? It took more than an elephant's gestation period for people to get their FCRA. This is my standard joke. The human gestation period is 9 months, the elephant is 18. With FCRA, we know the facts. So that is my tongue-in-cheek remark in that regard. Restrictions on corpus. I mean, CSR money can't come to corpus. Okay, fine, because some companies are just putting it as corpus in their foundation. So I can understand. But one foundation cannot give to another organization towards corpus. You as an organization, if you use your corpus, there are restrictions on that. You need to replenish it within next 5 years. Give organizations a breather. Now, even with subgranting, FCRA has completely abolished subgranting. You can't do onward granting. If you receive money, foreign contributions, you have to use it on your own for your own projects and programs. Now, even under income tax, with your local money, if you give it to another organization, only 85% of what you give will be counted as application of income for charitable purpose. And therefore, it kind of restricts your ability to create that 15% reserve, which you have been traditionally calculating. So those are some of the challenges on FCRA. Still, I believe a couple of thousand are still awaiting the renewal after such a long time. These are people to whom foreign donors are not even giving money because they don't know. What if tomorrow you get a email saying that your FCRA renewal has not been granted? That money is stuck. Remember, today, you can't even return the unspent money to the donor. The assets that you have under FCRA As per the law, a law as passed by legislature, by the Parliament of India, all FCRA assets, movable or immovable, shall vest in a competent government authority. You lose control over these assets. Which foreign donor would like to see that? So the final one is, yes, there is a lot of opportunity on the SSE, that is a social stock exchange. I'm not going to steal the thunder away from Pushpa and Gayatri, who will be touching upon it. Yes, even in that regard, I need to tell NPOs that, remember, it is a platform for raising money. You got to catch your own train at that platform. Don't think that because you're registered, money will start walking to you. There will be a lot of effort that you'll have to make. And the effort is enormous. And this is the last recommendation that I want to make to the government of India. I've been pretty vocal in my writings in this regard. Incentivize those who invest socially to the social stock exchange. If there is the standard 50% tax deduction for giving to an NGO, for investors, social investors who pick up what is called the zero coupon, zero principal instrument, make it 100% tax deduction, maybe even a weighted deduction, because give some after all, remember, the social stock exchange is not out of the sector. This is the government of India's own initiative. This was a grand proclamation made by none other than the finance minister in October 2019. We want the idea to fly. Now, if you want to fly, incentivize donors. And one more thing, you are going to be regulated by SEBI. Your ZC SEPI will be for a project that has been vetted by SEBI, that is a security exchange. There is no way that this funds is going to be misused. Allow even foreign investor, whether the organization has FCRA or not, a ZC ZP can be picked up even by a foreign investor. It's just these two recommendations and a platform that can really fly. 19 economies have tried out the social stock exchange and have failed. India has the potential to win, not fail, but win. Make these changes and things can happen. Sorry, Ruth, if I got carried away or emotional, but I'll end
No,
here.
I think that it's very clear that the people in our sector are passionate, Nashir. It's one of the best aspects about working in our sector. And so you've just exemplified that passion, and good for you. I just want to point out, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. They are coming through. And I do have questions for you, Nashir, but I'll wait till after the presentations and send them back. I also want to tell everyone that we will send out the presentation I did on the Doing Good Index to everyone who is attending this webinar. So you'll get it in your inbox, I believe. Or that's what my team tells me. Thank you, Nashir, for those wonderful and passionate comments. And now I will turn over to Pushpa, who may or may not match Nashir in terms of your passion. Let's see. But I know in terms of her commitment, it's very high and equal. Go ahead, Pushpa.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you everyone who's taken out time to join today. First of all, thank you for participating in the DGI survey year after year, and also for coming in good numbers this morning for this session. What I have seen over the years is that, I mean, I hate to be, in this session always talking as if I'm at daggers with no shield. He's my guru and inspiration, but I just have a different perspective to things. And I want to leave you with a lot of hope and, make you feel really confident that there are enormous opportunities. I've been looking at the questions as well, and let me try and respond to all of this. So first, since I represent GuideStar India and we kind of keep track of the population of nonprofits, just want to put some numbers. Yes, 3.3 million has been the historic government data. It's the population that was ever created, and that data is now more than a decade old. As far as income tax is concerned, Noshir, as of this morning, the number is 3.49 or 3.5 lakh tax-exempt nonprofits. And on Darpan, we are today at 2,44,000 nonprofits. And I expect to see that number swell up to about maybe 500,000, because now Darpan, being on Darpan is a requirement for your bank KYC. And about 15,995 to be precise is the number of NGOs active to receive FCRA. Almost an equal number almost opted out because they are deemed to have ceased or expired for FCRA. So these could be organizations that did not choose to apply or forgot to apply or did not do it in time. Of course, there's a big number, 20,000 plus, that lost their FCRA. And we are only about 250 people on this call this morning, right? And that's where I think the tragedy is. And someone had asked how many organizations participated in the DGI survey from India. About 192 completed, and a 50 odd did not complete the form, right? And we also did India's own survey of the nonprofit sector as part of another study, and close to 1,000 NGOs participated. So the larger message I'm going to be talking today about is that we have the opportunity, and as nonprofits, we really need to rise up and do what is within us to be doing. Usually when we ask around, in any meeting, what are our challenges? We always talk about resources, which is funds, technology, talent. And we think, the biggest problem in every meeting I ask NGOs, they say, is regulation. It's compliance, the burden, which Noshi just highlighted how terrible it is. It's backbreaking. It breaks my back as well as a nonprofit. But when we look at what are the barriers to giving from the people whom we seek, talent, technology, and money or resources, trust and transparency seem to be the biggest barriers, right? And what I see through this study and, the environment around us is that there are enormous opportunities for us in this country today to build trust, to build our transparency, for training, for getting talent, and for technology. And it's great that we have Gayatri here, because her organization kind of supports all of these in many different ways. And hopefully she can kind of underscore what I'm saying, or kind of oppose saying maybe the picture is not all that great. So let's look at, the regulation that has happened, and why I would think is that it's a positive step. In 2001, when I came into this sector through GIVE, and we were trying to address the gap in trust and transparency, and we're trying to build a platform to bring nonprofits and donors together, the regulation or the regulatory requirement was so low that when we went and said voluntarily report more, do more, adopt more good practices in your governance, adopt practices for transparency in accounting, in reporting back to your donors, reporting to public at large. We also had in those days the Credibility Alliance, which was a sector-driven effort to address trust and transparency. And it was all kind of saying, motivating people to say, let's do more than what the law requires, because the law is archaic and it's not getting revised. And today, 2 decades later, the law is getting revised so quickly, at least the income tax and FCRA. The other regulators like the charity commissioners, etc., are moving far more slowly. So some of these things that have happened, the reason I see it as positive, let me tell you again, from the people who are seeking to support us as nonprofits. There is a Darpan, and I said there are 2.5 lakh NGOs almost there. How are donors looking at this? The information on Darpan actually helps people to see if it's a legitimate nonprofit, who are the governing body members, and it says PAN available, registration certificate available, donor PAN, the trustee or the directors, the governing body members, PAN and Aadhaar verified. So that means that, the donor doesn't need to ask for the Aadhaar and PAN of your trustees. It's already verified by a government authority who holds this information, right? They have it in the Aadhaar, they have it in the income tax database of the individuals, and government says this has been authenticated for this organization. I see that as a big plus, and I actually hear donors saying that they actually look at Darpan and verify that. So organizations who are looking to enroll volunteers, platforms that bring volunteers, or say even the NSS program, which has almost, I believe, 30 lakh individuals who can volunteer with you, and they're all getting ready for the Danutsav, which is going to kick off in a month from now. They're able to look at that, and that is helping them to see as a trust indicator of the organization. Let us look at the income tax. When I started my career in this sector 2 decades ago, I used to compare the Form 990 in the US, which is the tax return, and the income tax return in India. And the audit report 10B was just a few pages a few years ago, and the income tax return was not that comprehensive. I know that many of you are going to attack me, saying that this has now become 40 to 100 pages, the Form 10B audit report. The ITR 7 is so bulky. But actually, for someone who looks at this very closely, and I would look at organizations like A.T. Chandra Foundation to support and capacity building, to understand these formats, and not just for the nonprofits. I think we have a big piece of education to be done for our chartered accountant community, for our accounting community, so that they are able to help us, and for the technology firms to take these inputs to help us build the systems required for this. For the large number of volunteers out there, there are enormous opportunities for you to do real work, to use your real talent that you use in the corporate sector to help nonprofits gear up for this. Why I love the Form 10B or the 10BB. Let's, for a moment, thank government that organizations who have less than 5 crore budgets, or who do not get FCRA funding. So, it's only 16,000 organizations who are smaller, but also have, some of them may be smaller, but also have to go for the more detailed form. The reason is now it actually pins down your chartered accountant. It has given them a detailed brief to provide more information and to audit and sign off, saying, I have looked at all these things, right? So for me, you should be actually, you means we, all of us as NGOs, could be telling our donors, hey, here is our Form 10B. It's an audit report where the auditor has looked at all of this. Here is the tax return I have filed with the government. And I'm using exactly this pitch with the social stock exchange to say that you don't have to look at everything again in the stock exchange, because another government body has actually provided for looking at these things, and the chartered accountant is responsible to sign off on a whole number of documents. I would actually be thankful to the government of India, because our tax returns are still a private document, unlike the Form 990s in the US that are not a private document for a 501c3 organization. So we are tax exempt, and our tax returns are in the private domain, and it's only voluntarily that you can share it in the public domain. And I'm sure most of your funders ask for it, and it's perfectly all right to share with them and sign whatever NDAs you would like to have. So I am seeing more regulation as an opportunity to tell the donor community that the government regulates us enough. We are reporting, we have all these things in order, right? And tell some of the donors that give us the opportunity to build that capacity. So moving further from there, to build, I said trust and transparency are the two problems, key problems, and trust, the barriers, and trust is, the regulation is helping build trust. Let me now come to transparency. Now, we find in our work that most of us in the nonprofits are not able to clarify our theory of change, why we exist. We are not able to track our programs and results and share those indicators. We are not sharing our governing body members, our governing practices, which are matters of concern to build trust. We're not talking, therefore, about theory of change, governance, our results. And how can we use various platforms? I think India is one of the few countries that has a public information repository of the sector, which I represent, GuideStar India, other than the Darpan platform. And it's a free platform. So please build your transparency, improve your discoverability to attract the resources by being in all of these places. And platforms allow you to choose your level of comfort with being transparent. So be discoverable. have the adequate information that the donor community or resource providers are looking for it. There are enough opportunities today to build, offer training. So trust, transparency, technology, and training is what I want to highlight before I finish my address here. So to build your trust, I said regulation is helpful. There are platforms that allow you to help. There are formats now that are there to help you. And the technology and the platforms that are there for fundraising, for volunteering, for even just sharing your information, that there is technology to help people discover you and search. So you need to be out there and share this information. There are a lot of opportunities for training. I saw some questions saying that this is only for well-established entities. No, there are programs like the Dasra Rebuild and many others where, they're targeting grassroots organizations, smaller organizations. And if you're there in repositories like ours and on Darpan, etc., they're actually searching for organizations. I know for sure there are always inquiries. Can we figure out women-led organizations? Can we get a list of organizations working in the most marginalized areas, working for tribals, so thematically. So have you put that kind of information out there? There are training programs available for organizational development as a whole. The Britspan program we are aware of. There is programs from Prabha and others, for leadership, for second line. Then there are programs, there are lots of tech for dev that is there. We all know about, Donald Lobo and Chintu Gudia Foundation putting out a lot of tech for dev resources. There's ICAM Fellows who's actually setting up a portal to attract talent and to provide you resources for that. And we've always had NASCOM Foundation that provides in-kind resources in terms of software and technology. So there's a lot of work that's happening in the country. And some of you would say, but how do I know? These don't land in my inbox. So just join forum.guidestarindia.org, if not any other. There are many WhatsApp groups to which Noshi, Rai, etc. belong. These are groups. If you're active, they retain you in the group. Otherwise, you kind of move out. So there's a lot of, I would say, opportunities. There are so many that I cannot list all of them. But practically every other day, we are able to put out an opportunity. So I would kind of recap, kind of saying that regulation is actually a boon, because it is one way of saying that government requires us to report. And then there is all of this that's happening in India to provide us resource and opportunities to equip ourselves to do a better job beyond what the government requires. So I'm not really going to talk much about the social stock exchange now, but all I would say is that's another step towards legitimizing the work that we do, and a lot of resources that will come through the capacity building fund from there to not just equip ourselves for the social stock exchange, but I would say leverage these opportunities to, improve ourselves and access to donors. So just to put out a statistic there are 102 organizations today registered on both the stock exchanges together, NSE, BSE. 10 of them have got listed. About 22 crore have been raised, but these are very tiny, tiny numbers, but have the potential to kind of reach out to a large number of donor population. And we are already seeing the component of retail giving in these listed securities that have taken place has grown. So I'll stop there, Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you. But Pushpa, will you just repeat and slowly the name of that platform that you mentioned, where all of these trainings are listed, so that that you, because I wasn't able to write it down, so I don't think other people.
Forum, forum.guidestarindia.org. I would say this is at least one place that you can remember, and we simply put together whatever resources come to us and we are aware of there, and you can just go and register yourself. Even without registering, you can keep looking up for opportunities there. And there will be an explosion of opportunities in the next 1 month, because Daan Utsav, India's Festival of Giving, is just round the corner. And every resource provider is trying to look for nonprofits and connect with them. And there's going to be an abundance of what people want to give. So this is the time to really make those connections. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pushpa. And last but not least, we have a real live donor on with us, Gayatri Lobo. And I will just say that ATE Chandra Foundation is really a very progressive organization that does provide capacity building. So I know that Gayatri is going to talk about the work that you do, why you do it. There's a lot of people who want to understand and learn more. So go ahead.
Thanks, Ruth, and thank you to the CAPS team for having me here as a part of this conversation. It's sometimes nice to have the outside-in view. So I'm happy to share both my thoughts on the report, but also what I'm seeing as a philanthropic foundation from across the sector. So my first reaction when I read the report was actually not as bad as I expected, and maybe that's the pessimist in me who expected us to fall in the same category as Bangladeshers currently. But of course, as Nosha said, we all have a dream that we'd move up at least a notch on that survey. We also know that Indians are not giving as much as their global counterparts. So read some statistics recently which said that Indians on average spend 0.3%, so 0.3% of their income versus 3 to 4% of the developed countries across the world. And I think part of this can be attributed to the fact that we give more to religious giving. But I think a large part of it, to what everyone spoke about, is the lack of trust. It's kind of depressing sometimes when you read on Twitter or you read on social media what the general narrative about the social sector is. We, in the social sector, NGOs are thought of as being inefficient, not resourceful, they're unprofessionally managed, and sometimes even to the extent of saying that NGOs are just fronts for politicians to make money. And I'm sure there are NGOs that fall into all of those categories, but I can say with 100% confidence that everyone on this call today is actually representing the class of NGOs that don't fall under this definition. So how do we actually make the sector more attractive for donations to come to such NGOs and people to volunteer their time or even their employment life to such NGOs? And I think, as much as we'd hate to say it, part of that needs to be regulation. Regulation can do both, right? On the one hand, it can ensure that as a donor or as an employee working in the sector, my needs and my money is taken care of. There's no swindling of money happening. So you need that base. But how the regulations are written and how the regulations are implemented, that then causes this narrative of the sector being inefficient and unresourceful getting furthered. That's what we need to protect against. In the recent past, and I say recent past, not so recent past as well, there have been multiple instances where the government has shown almost an endorsement of sorts of the sector, right? The CSR law back in 2014, 2013, I forget which year, and more recently, the social stock exchange. In the last few months, since launching of the social stock exchange, we've seen about 10 NGOs list, the latest one having raised 10 crores on the stock exchange. So while it perhaps had a slow start, I think the CSR law implementation also had a slow start. I was raising funds at that time, so I was on the other side, and would go out to companies saying, hey, there's this law, 2%, and we would all look at annual reports and calculate how much that 2% would be, therefore how much can we pitch for. And we were left with blank stares, mostly saying we actually haven't yet figured out who in the organization is going to manage this. But on 31st March, my phone did not stop ringing. And on that one day, we raised upwards of 4 crores. All because suddenly this regulation had to be enacted. Post that, cut to more recently, the regulation now says that whatever you give in the year has to be spent by the NGO within that year. Now, to us in the nonprofit sector, it's like, one more headache that we have to manage now. We have to spend that money as well. But there's a reason behind that, right? The idea is that don't just give money on the last day as a donor. Make sure that you've actually put some thought into it. you're not just giving money to the NGO that's top of mind, but you're thinking about your strategy, you're figuring out where you want to make impact, and therefore giving it out in a more thoughtful manner. Whether that's actually happening or not is a completely different webinar to have. But the thought behind that regulation was this. I can also anecdotally talk about the collaboration between government and the nonprofit sector. Again, when I was running a nonprofit, this was almost impossible. We would wait for hours outside to meet somebody. When you meet them, I mean, I've actually been asked to pay for the tea that was being served to me in an office, and I can say this aloud, but in the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai. And it seemed absurd. Post-COVID, a lot of that has changed. And I think COVID is what I would attribute this change to. Because when things shut down, when the lockdown happened and nobody was willing to step out, it was the selfless NGOs that said, it's fine. I'll put on my mask, I'll put on my gloves, I'll wear my N95 if needed, but I will go out and ensure that food reaches and other essentials reach people who can't access them. We did a zero survey across Mumbai, and we were doing this with the government. And they said, how do we actually convince people to come out and give their blood? I mean, this is a time when there's a global pandemic, everything is locked down, people aren't allowed to step out of their houses. And we are expecting 10,000 people to give blood samples. And we were sitting in this on the Zoom call and figuring out how to do this. And I suggested maybe we'll talk to a few NGOs and see if they can convince people. And we realized that the trust that communities have is with the NGOs, not with the government. And so we worked with 3 NGOs in different parts of Mumbai and actually were able to collect blood from over 9,000 people, which then gave the government enough data to start unlocking, because the data showed that most people had already had COVID. But that actually opened up the city. I think government realized in multiple such instances that we have to work with the nonprofit sector. So Ruth, while you said 28% have never, engaged with government, I actually see the glass half full and say, wow, so 70% have, which is not something I could have said 5 years ago. So I'm glad to see that part of the survey. So yes, we would definitely want to move up to doing better from where we are right now. But I don't think the answer to that is reduced regulation. I think it's how we implement these regulations, and how, because I do find a lot of, and no offense to any of the chartered accountants in the call, but I do find that there are regulations and then those are stretched beyond any necessary need and implemented with the NGOs. And I've seen a lot of NGOs come back to me saying, oh, we've got this negative report from the donor's accountant because of ABC. And I was like, but there's no law that says that you can't do ABC. There are regulations, but the accountant in that particular case, and I've seen this in multiple cases, has stretched it beyond necessary. So I think how we implement the regulations is also important. I don't want to take away from those who've suffered the wrath of FCRA. I don't understand it. I don't understand why the regulation's there. But I do want to say I have seen instances where NGOs have gone back and cleared some of those doubts. They have been, the FCRAs have been reinstated. So I just want to leave us with that glimmer of hope that it is possible to get a negative remark removed. So I do hope that we can see a world where, as Noshri puts it, there's a focus on ease of doing good. And I think, but I do think that will have to be hand in hand with the right amount of regulation. I'm happy to answer questions or touch upon capacity building if that's of interest as a foundation.
Gayatri, why don't you just mention why ATE Chandra Foundation does do capacity building, and And why do you think it's such a hurdle for others?
I think again I'm going to answer your last question first. I think again it comes from the belief that nonprofits don't know how to run their organizations, which is completely wrong. And therefore our money can be used only for programmatic needs, and that's how I'll get bang for the buck. But we actually at the foundation think the opposite. So if you build an institution, you build an NGO, the return that you have on your money is actually far greater than if you just think narrow and specific line items. We don't go down the unrestricted route, because what we found is in the past when we've done that, NGOs have still spent it on programmatic needs and not actually spent it on strengthening their organizations. So I think Indian NGOs still have that little bit of a path to cross where they also focus on their own needs and not necessarily. I think it's also almost a feeling of guilt that how can I spend this on my organization? It's meant for beneficiaries, but we need to think long term. One of the things that we're trying to do is in our interest of supporting building these long-term organizations, we're able to get enough data to convince other donors as well. So you will see us writing a lot more in the recent past, talking a lot more about why capacity building is important. And we have started to see donor narrative shift, and more of them thinking about, right, okay, you need to raise funds because that will help you. Fine, I'll fund your fundraising costs. So I think there is a change happening. We still have a long way to go, but I feel hopeful. I will say one last thing. We put, like similar to GuideStar, on the trainings and opportunities. We also put out on LinkedIn every week, if I'm not wrong, but any good but vetted opportunities for organizations to build their capacity building, and lots of resources that we put out there as well. So just follow us on LinkedIn and you'll get more information.
Okay, and when you go to LinkedIn, you look up ATE
Chandra Foundation. That's
okay.
Right. Thank
All
you.
right. So now I'm going to bring back Pushpa and Nashir, and you'll stay Gayatri. And we got quite a few questions. Nashir, so some of you may have heard my metaphor, which I give, that regulations in my mind are like cholesterol. Good regulations allow things to flow, and bad regulations block the system. So that's like good and bad cholesterol. The problem is that when you can take a medical test and know which good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, it's harder to differentiate between which regulations allow the system to work and flow and which ones don't. So Nashir, maybe you can answer. One question is, how can regulations improve governance? Can you address that one? You have to go off mute, actually.
Governance by itself is a very huge topic. I mean, it's all about ensuring compliance. It's about transparency. It's about accountability. Where regulators are concerned, there is a certain norm in which you report to them. But I think governance goes beyond a regulatory regime. And this is something that I've been talking about in my earliest days, as I talk about now, that good governance is about even doing more than what the law requires you to do, in terms of several things are not required by the government of India or the regulations, but you can do that out of transparency, such as not every piece of legislation wants you to put up your accounts in public domain, but you may decide in the interest of transparency and accountability, I'm going to do that. So I think governance is more an internal value. Government can only regulate you within a certain framework. So if you're talking in how governance can be improved, I think where regulations are concerned, we have enough of it. And I think anyone who feels that anyone can cross the line, then please understand even corporate governance. I mean, despite the laws, despite SEBI, we do see corporate scams. So where human beings are concerned, people will transgress. So I think end of the day, governance is a human value. governance is something that you have as a board value, as an internal organization value. That would be my take on this.
Thank you, Nashir. This is both Gayatri and Pushpa have been very involved in the social stock exchange, and there's a couple of questions about that, and I leave it up to you. One is a question about why investment on the social stock exchange is not eligible for a tax subsidy, and that's in the weeds that I'm not familiar with. So that's one. And then the second one is just very basic information of how do you even put yourself into the pipeline for consideration. Pushpa or Gayatri, you guys both are experts on the social stock exchange. Who wants to answer those questions?
Pushpa, you wanna
Gayatri,
go?
you can answer the tax one because you worked hard to get that going. And I'll talk about the registration.
Sure. So, actually, you are eligible for ATG on the social stock exchange. While this clarity wasn't there initially, it has been clarified now. So go ahead and get your tax benefits.
Gayatri, may I intervene? That
Yes,
clarity has only come to a couple of organizations individually. There is no notification by the Central Board of Direct Taxes in this, which
Yeah,
is very desirable from my legal point understanding. It's a
yeah,
letter, private letter sent to two organizations that yes, it's a form of a grant and therefore ATG can be given. I would much rather the government comes up with a clear, I mean, as in the CBDT, with a clear notification that yes, investments through the SSE are eligible for tax deduction under ADG.
sure,
I
sure.
don't know whether you agree or disagree on that.
No, we did try getting this, but the clarification we got was there was nothing in writing saying it wasn't eligible. So how do we give a letter saying it is eligible? And so if you do find
Isn't it
something,
possible just to list out in the public domain that
yeah, I think maybe in
investments
the FAQs, yeah,
yeah,
something we can push for, Pushpa.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll suggest to the exchanges if they can put it
Yeah.
in the FAQs. Again, I would say go to forum.guidestarindia.org and you tag SSE, you will get all the latest changes. And to the technical question about how to get registered, we on the forum as well as on our website, guidestarindia.org /SSC.ASPX. I can share it with the CAP team. They can put it out and send it out to you, whichever way. So both NSC and BSC have a registration link on their website, and they have all the resources, checklists, and all of that. And believe me, they are eagerly waiting for you to register with them. Naushir and I are on the governing council of the BSC Social Stock Exchange. And if at all you get stuck anywhere, we ask people through various fora to ping us so that we can talk to the respective teams and get it moving. Registration is a fairly straightforward process. But what is very important to know is please read and understand what are the reporting obligations, the compliance requirements. There are very stringent annual disclosures that are required to be made. And the idea of registration is that you get familiar with the stock exchange model, undergo a lot of capacity building that would be available to you once you're registered, and then move towards listing a project. And there are people, again, looking out for organizations to be listed. There are teams in both the exchanges who have a target for outreach and to enroll organizations. So please be more discoverable and reach out to us, and we are happy to connect. But the exchanges have an open mechanism to process applications.
Okay, thank you very much. I have essentially a question. I don't know this, but one of the participants is saying that because there's so much more reporting necessary, the auditing firms are charging NGOs or nonprofits a lot more to do their audits. Any suggestions about, I mean, that seems like damned if you do and damned if you don't. Any suggestions about that, Nashir?
Yeah, I mean, audit fees are actually regulated by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. So, I mean, they cannot overshoot. I think it always depends upon the volume of work. So, there are small organizations where the volume or the effort that is required for auditing, vouching, and a whole bunch of things that are. But for every other piece, I mean, you may want to issue a utilization certificate duly done by a auditor. I mean, there would be separate fees for that. I suppose these are professional fees. I mean, we don't quibble with doctors when we land up at a hospital. Why are you giving me this medicine? No, I'm not speaking as a chartered accountant here, but I guess fees are fees for professional services. But Pushpa, I saw your hand up. You want to say something?
Yeah. So I like what you said about, we don't haggle for the fees when we land up with the doctors. I'm saying again here, prevention lies with the nonprofit. Some of you have your own accounting staff. Most of us have half a chartered accountant. Now there are, fractional services of CFOs available, meaning that you may not afford to have a full-time financial officer for your organization, but there are people who provide part-time services. Again, there are retired government employees and a lot of volunteers available to help with the accounting. There are
How do you find
checklists.
out about that, Pushpa?
Yeah, so again, I would say turn to the forum and I will put up an audit checklist there. Again, the WhatsApp group to which some of you in the audience belong, I looked at your names. There is a separate finance group in one of the common WhatsApp groups where checklists are put up by various people. So start using that. And if as an organization, you're able to feed your chartered accountant with a lot of information, then their role is to audit and not prepare. Today, for a lot of organizations, the auditor itself prepares your accounts or has to really put their hand deep down the organization and pull out the information. So the audit fees, Naushir, is regulated, but then they have other charges around it. So the more and more we can learn to self-help using volunteers and these training entities. There are many entities providing accounting training. We at GuideStar India, again, do free workshops on capacity building in finance and accounting, etc. Sign up, be part of the forum. And like Gayatri said, they put out these opportunities. I'll start sharing our workshops with you as well,
Yeah,
Gayatri.
please. Yeah.
So yeah, so there is help around.
Yeah, if I can just add
Okay.
one thing, there are also auditors and there are auditors, right? So one of the NGOs that was listing on the social stock exchange, their auditor raised their fees multiple times. They just changed the auditor. So if yours is asking for more, find another one that works within your budget. Market forces will take care of the fees they charge.
So a few people are asking for that WhatsApp group address. How do you want to handle that, Pushpa? We can.
I don't know if we can put anything in chat, so otherwise I could have put shared
You
links.
can send it to my team and they'll put it up.
Okay, I'll do that.
And Gayatri, people are asking for your website address. If you could send that to my team, they'll put it up.
Yeah, our website is in process for the last year, but hopefully it'll be up in the next 2 months.
Do you need some capacity building in that regard?
I need to clone a few people on my team.
Nashir, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I said even on our own CAP, we have a very active blog over there. So, I mean, whenever there is any change in legislation or an update, you put up. So we'll give you the link to that also. So people, and it's free resource. People can have access to all these updates, including what changed in the last Finance Act. What do you do now in terms of filing your Form 9A, Form 10? I mean, all that's there, from the latest to what you may see over the last 1 or 2 years.
Okay, our team will send out my presentation along with the links to everyone who's on this in this webinar, so we can do that. There's a couple questions for me. Let me just take them. Someone said, when you're talking about advanced software, what are you talking about? Most people know basic. So they know Word, they know Excel, they know word processing, they know rudimentary kind of Excel-like things. What many organizations are not using are things like data management, database management. Who are your recipients? Who are your donors? Those kind of databases are not being used. Also project management like Asana and those kinds of project management tools are not being used. And I'm not even talking about AI. I'm just talking about software. So those are what we're talking about, just things that make that theoretically are going to make your life easier if you use them and get a handle on it. Any other comments about software that anyone wants to make? Let me just then answer one other question. As I said in my presentation, collaboration is like, if I had a nickel for every time I hear that word these days, I would be a wealthy woman. It is the trendy thing to, yeah, we all want to collaborate. Collaboration is really hard. And so many people come and say, let's collaborate. And I say, okay, well, what's in it for us? And they say, well, we'll be collaborating. I'm like, but what do you want us to do? What are the benefits? What are the tasks? Well, we'll just be collaborating. We can sign an MOU saying we're collaborating. I think that people need to understand that when you agree to collaborate, collaborations only succeed if they have some functionality. One, there has to be benefits to all the partners involved. So, everyone is going to stay in the collaboration if their organization is receiving some kind of positive outcome from being in this collaboration. Two, not everybody does exactly the same thing. So a successful collaboration plays to the strengths of the different players and kind of leverages that they have different strengths in a useful way. And three, you really need a governance structure. You need a secretariat or some kind of mechanism whereby decisions are made for the collaborative effort that cannot be ad hoc. It really needs to be spelled out. So collaborations make a lot of sense. Our problems are very big. Our resources are small. How do we work together? Sure, that's great. But we need to be thoughtful about how we build those collaborative efforts. CAPS did a study on public-private partnerships that address a lot of these, which is available on our website, including a number of Indian examples. And we're about to release a new study on collaboration. I will tell you that there's some organizations that are writing about collaboration saying people enter into collaborations because it's more efficient. Actually, a lot of people in collaboration say it's not necessarily more efficient, it can be more impactful. And in Asia, it really depends on who's asking you to join the collaboration in the first place, because relationships, pre-existing relationships to the collaborations and ones that would be enhanced through the collaborations are really an important feature for many organizations to enter into a collaboration. So our study on collaborations will be coming out in the next month or so on our website. And all of our studies are on our website, caps.org. And I just want to clarify one point. The United States is considered the most philanthropic country, and it's only 2% Gayatri. The amount of giving is equivalent to 2% of the GDP of the country. People ask us all the time, how much do Asians give? Part of the problem is so much of it is undocumented that we really have a hard time knowing. Every time you give a donation, at the temple or, to a beggar on the street, obviously that's not counting. It's hard to really know, but almost certainly you're right. It's under 1%. And there's no reason why Asia cannot get to 2%. In fact, according to the Doing Good Index, if we got to 2% as a region, that means 2% of the equivalent to the GDP of 2% of the countries in Asia. It would raise about 800 billion a year, which would go a long way to that SDG deficit that we spoke about early on. So can we be doing better? You bet. And as we heard, there's a lot of mechanisms in place to try to get us there. So I think that gets to most of the questions. I think we're out of time. I really want to thank everyone for joining. I really want to thank Nashir and Pushpa for being the most amazing partners on the Doing Good Index and in life in general. It's an honor and a privilege to work with you. And I really want to thank Gayatri for taking your time to join us today and answering questions. And of course, I want to thank all the people on this call who joined us, and especially those who filled out the survey for the Doing Good Index. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And no good deed goes unpunished. We'll be back to ask you to do it again in a year or so. And having said that, have a really wonderful, and oh, let me just say, I want to thank my wonderful team at CAPS, who does all the back end work on this report, on the analysis, and on putting on events like this. I am fortunate to have such an amazing team. And now there are many questions that we haven't been able to answer, but there are a number of people who say thank you. You're welcome. It is from the bottom of our heart that we want to support this sector and support all the people who spend their lives trying to make the world a better place. So thank you.